All righty, he's the Democratic candidate for governor. He is Matt Brown, and he's in the House tonight.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Welcome aboard. This is the Friday program. You know that because you know how to look at the calendar. We record this on Thursday, so if anything crazy breaks in the gubernatorial race, we'll catch up to that on Monday, but that's how our broadcast schedule works. And it's nice on Friday evenings. We're able to kind of stretch it out a little bit and focus on at least one concept or one person in this case. Matt Brown is the former Secretary of State and now Democratic gubernatorial candidate, and he's my guest this evening. And with no further ado, let's just kind of jump into this whole thing. Here's a headline that I think has really dominated a lot of the conversation, at least, you know, on the talk radio side. Actually, go back to the first one, just the one headline, thank you. Fung Raimondo in no hurry to debate primary rivals. And this, these two would like to just see this conversation wane. But I don't think this conversation should wane. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Dan.
It's like an old, tired playbook for election polling leaders. The day that broadcast stations decide to really shove it down the throat of people who don't show up is the day that this behavior stops, and everybody makes their own decisions on how to handle that. How many debates do you have scheduled with Spencer Dickinson, who is the other Democratic candidate so far?
I think there are 3 or 4 right now.
Okay, one on the radio, I know. I'm sure newsmakers
Yep,
here will do that.
Yep.
There's Spencer, who would appear on the show recently. You going to feel an emptiness about all of that if the chair is in fact empty, or if she doesn't show?
Well, I think it's worse than an emptiness. I think it's really, I think it's kind of a violation of our basic way of doing democracy in this country. It's been part of the democratic process, part of the way voters make their decisions for as long as anybody can remember. In fact, I think a couple of days ago was somebody mentioned to me it was the anniversary of the first Lincoln-Douglas debate. You know, so it's been a long time that we've been doing debates to help voters hear our differences, to hear our viewpoints. And you know, it's one thing, I think in the past, as you alluded to, it's been part of the playbook for incumbents to try to do as few debates as possible and to avoid doing debates, but to not do any is really, I think, insulting to the voters and insulting to the democratic process.
Well, speaking of insulting, she's more or less pigeonholed you as a liar, somebody who can't tell the truth, somebody who's not credible, somebody who twists her issues. And I think there's a more than fine line between the spin that you and other candidates will put on your own perspective and downright lying about it. I mean, you're the former Secretary of State in this place. I mean, you ran for Senate, you had a little skip up there, and you've been in the private sector, but this notion that you kind of went away, who the hell are you, you got no credibility, I don't know whether it's sticking or not. I have no sense of what's going on out there, but you've kept your cool over it. Are you deeply insulted over it?
Well, I think it's, like you said, I think it's political kind of, you know, negative politics. I mean, it's a distraction from what I think was the question at the time, which is why won't you debate? So, you know, this idea of, you know, my background is, you know, or sort of a negative hit on my background is kind of absurd because I've spent my whole life in public service. Since I was a kid, it's all I've ever done is to do public service. So, as you know, I went to college, came back and helped to start City Year and ran that, which is still going strong, tutoring kids in the schools. Was Secretary of State, did service in that way, and then started Global Zero, working to make the world safer, reduce nuclear arms, was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize twice. So I've spent my entire life working to solve problems that matter to people, make the world fairer, tackle serious problems. And that's all I've ever done. So any, you know, I mean, we should be debating our ideas, but any kind of sort of political hits on, well, you haven't been in service is the opposite of what's true. I've been serving and working for the people of this state my whole life.
She would suggest that you've you know, earned a 15-yard penalty at least for comparing her to Donald Trump. Now, there isn't a Democrat in America that isn't going to feel nails on the chalkboard over the concept that they've been compared to Donald Trump. She's done her own dancing on the president's head often. So when you throw that at her, it's enough to probably make her go nuts. And I think I can understand that. What's the rationale over that?
Well, all I said was look at these policies. That Donald Trump's, one of his main agendas was to cut Medicaid. Governor Raimondo cut Medicaid by $125 million in this state. And that was matched by federal funds, so we really lost $250 million. And that hurt a lot of people. And nursing homes closed, and seniors had to leave the homes they'd been living in. So, you know, Trump's main, quote, economic agenda was big corporate tax breaks. Those went almost all to corporations. That's Governor Raimondo's primary agenda, is big corporate tax breaks. So just kind of go down the line and talk about issues. But look, I think the whole
She would call it job incentive, right? I'm not here to do her bidding. We've offered her time here. She's been on the program on a number of occasions. I hope she comes. I hope she debates you. I hope she gets off her high horse. I don't know, but you know, she would say that it's. By the way, it's a jobs program that she and I have openly disagreed about. I'm about creating fertile ground, equitably. Taxation policy, I think, does that. You and I probably would differ on that approach, but she has targeted industry. She has, you know, put blinders on in terms of what she wants to do, in terms of how she's going to do it, and she has put a boatload of dough into companies targeted individually, no doubt about that. Now, whether that's corporate tax breaks or whether that's targeted business investment, it depends, I guess, on your perspective.
Well, I can tell you the perspective, my perspective, but I think it's also the perspective of most people across this state, and it's certainly what I've been hearing out on the campaign trail, is that the system we have, the way things are working, is broken. Or some people say it's not broken, it's working exactly as it's designed to. It's working for big corporations, it's working for the wealthiest, it's working for politicians, but it is not working at all for people across this state. And that is painfully obvious if you go out and, you know, you hear from people every day. Think about what a home cost people 40 years ago and what it costs today. Think about what healthcare costs, as you've talked about a lot, and what it costs today. These are not small changes. These are life-shattering changes over just the last generation. And the government's not doing anything about it, nothing. And so my view is that, you know, I really don't see this campaign as about Governor Raimondo or about me. I do see it as about a system that is locked in, and that seems impenetrable and unchangeable to most people out there. And I consider Governor Raimondo to be a part of that system. That's the issue here, is that she's a part of that system and she's extending it and perpetuating it. And the idea that we're going to solve our problems by taking yet more money from people in this state who do not have any and giving it to large corporations that have all of it and have all the breaks is not going to solve the system, not going to solve the problem.
What is that financial transfer specifically? Taking money from people who don't have it, giving it to corporate citizens. What specifically do you mean by that?
Well, all these, you know, what I call giveaways, or some people would call incentives. We pay for that. That's our taxpayer money. And these are, keep in mind, these big corporations, they've already gotten all the breaks in life. I mean, they move jobs overseas for cheaper labor if they want to. They stash their money overseas and don't pay taxes while regular people here are paying. So they've already got breaks piled upon breaks.
Do you have an economic mindset going into this job as governor that you would create every candidate from every direction and every orientation, every label, left, right, liberal, conservative, whatever, always talks about jobs and economic development.
Yeah.
So what's your means? I mean, are you committed to a concept of economic development, or you just want it to kind of take care of itself?
No. I think we have to be all hands on deck for economic development, because look, the fact is that Rhode Island had a booming economy. People forget this because it's been so long, but we had a booming economy for a century and a half because the Industrial Revolution started here, sure. And it boomed until the middle of the last century when the manufacturing started to leave. There were almost 100,000 more people living in Providence in 1940 than there are today. That's a shocking level of decline when you think about the growth of the national population. So we had it, manufacturing left, and nothing has replaced it. And governors come in one after another promising to do economic development, and nothing has changed for people. You can say, well, we created this or we did that and have press conferences about it, but the fact of life for people, aside from whatever you hear about the stock market, the GDP, continues to get harder.
So in a nutshell, all right, so we'll pause here. So that's the problem, and we'll get the solution when we come back. Stay with us. So there's a headline from Forbes that kind of highlights the challenge that Governor Raimondo has with a approval rating that hovers at 40 or less percent. Yet she claims that she's done a great economic job. And, you know, Forbes is the kind of place that takes a look and actually would like to champion somebody like Gina Raimondo. So it's interesting that that data comes through. But it's on economics. It's on development. You've already explained what you think the problems are. So tell me, what's your quick solution? Nothing's quick, but what's the bullet points here?
Right. Well, I think that nothing is quick is important, because part of the problem is that politicians are often more interested in re-election in 2 or 4 years than in getting into the deep solutions that we need to do here that are going to be hard. We've got a deep hole. I'd say it's a 4-decade hole, and I think it's getting worse. So it's, you know, there's some things we can do and make progress in 1, 2, 3 years, but it's going to take time, and we need to be serious and honest about that. So I think that a huge part of the future of the economy is small business. This is a small business state. It's a small business culture. And all the breaks, as I said, from the national level to the state level, keep going to the corporations. Because, I would just add, they're the ones who give the massive campaign contributions to the politicians.
You've made that point repetitively.
Right. Yes. So, well, I think it's important. So I think we're stuck there. And what we need to do is, instead of giving all the breaks to the big corporations, we need to give the breaks to the small businesses. So I am proposing that we do what 14 other states have done, which is to have the big corporations pay a little bit more, pay their fair share, given that they've gotten all the breaks at all levels of government, and cut taxes for smaller businesses.
At a corporate tax rate you're talking about?
A graduated corporate tax rate, or graduated corporate tax rate, a fair business tax. So I hear from all the time, and I know you hear too, from small business owners, some very small businesses, a couple of employees, some have been going for generations. They're breaking their backs, and what they could do with a little break in terms of adding jobs, creating a new product, is massive. And we give these millions to the corporations that already have millions of dollars. So that's one thing I would do. Let's invest in our small business. I would love to see Rhode Island be the best state in the country to start and run a small business. Let's carve that out for ourselves for the future. The clean energy. So we can't, we can't be leaders in clean energy while building a frack gas plant, which is, Governor Raimondo has been pushing for, or expanding LNG and all of those. We got to leave that behind. That's not the 20th century. That's the 19th century. Polluting, bad for the climate, bad for the air, bad for the water.
I'm not sure that this Burrillville power plant is a big polluter. I've done numerous shows, looked into it. I'm not sure what you're driving at there.
Well, no, there are toxins that spew out of there. I mean, the people, I've been up there, the people living on Bucks Hill.
Nobody wants anything in their backyard. Nobody wants anything in their backyard.
In their backyard, in the state, or in the region. We need to be...
What are we going to do to fill our electric supply needs, which are waning, and we've got power plants closing left and right?
Yeah, well, first of all, the fact is that the outfit that oversees the grid here said just in December that we do not need the power from that gas plant. So we need to be going to clean energy. We need to be going much faster. Massachusetts and New York are already out to bid for 4 gigawatts. That's more of wind. That's more than we use in the state all year of all energy.
She's pushing the wind farm on Narragansett Bay.
We got to be all in. I mean, her plan is to be 38% renewable energy by 2035. States are talking about 100% before then. We, of all states, with all the wind, we should be the first out of the gate and get the economic benefits from it. And that's what we're talking about here, is the economy. That could create 11,000 jobs, going full in to create a clean energy economy. We need to do that, and we can't do that if we're still building, like the biggest new frack gas plant in New England. So that's another thing. And then a third thing I'd say is housing. So, we've got an affordable housing crisis in this state. We're one of the worst in the country in terms of the affordability of housing, which is a factor of how much the housing costs have gone up while wages have stayed the same in this state. So we got a lot of people in this state who are struggling to afford housing, both to buy and to rent, and nothing's being done about it. This would be a win-win. If we do what I'm proposing, which is to essentially cut the red tape, cut the bureaucracy, and allow builders who want to build houses that people can afford, and they know how to do it now, they're eager to do it. Let them do it. We just got to change some rules.
And where do we put them? Where do we put affordable housing?
Well, first of all, we can do more to incentivize using existing buildings that have either been abandoned or underused. But then secondly is to build new ones. We should build them the same way the state was built. You know, I think the way the state looks, the way it emerged, you know, hundreds of years ago, and that so much of New England has emerged is the right way, which is city and town centers with, you know, rural area, farmland, and so on in between. So the housing should be built up in those core areas so people can walk to work and walk their kids to school, and we should incentivize that. But to do that, we need to help the cities and towns, and they need help with education funding. And you and I have talked about this before. Everyone's pulling their hair out about the fact that the school buildings are falling down, and it is shameful that school buildings are falling down in this state. But we got to talk about why. How did we end up in a situation in this state where the school buildings are falling down around our kids? And the reason is because for a long time now, and straight through to Governor Raimondo's agenda, is the incessant, endless tax cuts, extreme tax cuts on corporations and the wealthiest 1%, which you and I have talked about. And that has essentially forced money out of school funding and forced cities and towns to raise property taxes, which hits the middle class. So what I'm proposing is we cut those, we repeal those tax cuts for the corporations and the wealthiest 1%, and we fund our schools again, which would help the cities and towns.
The theory against that would be that the major employers in this state will do whatever they can to get out if they're going to be more expensive to run.
Well, there's a lot of evidence that that's just not true. There's a whole study in New Jersey after they did some of these changes that you know, these corporations didn't leave, that in fact what businesses are looking for, more than a $10 million handout, you know, you're talking about some of these are multi-billion-dollar corporations, and we're going to take $10 million from the people of the state who don't have 2 dimes to rub together and give it to corporations paying their CEOs, you know, $20 million a year. That's not what they're looking for. What they're looking for is a place that has good public schools for their employees, houses their employees can afford, roads that aren't broken, good governance. They're just looking for these basic things. I think we can attract more business and have more businesses grow and more people come here and more people want to stay here by solving those problems that what you're talking about. Make it fertile ground, not individual handouts for hand-picked corporations that are often, by the way, are donors to the governor, but to create a state, schools, infrastructure, a good small business environment, clean energy, these kinds of things that makes it a place where people and businesses want to come and want to grow and want to stay.
All right, when we come back, we'll talk about what Matt Brown would do and how he would behave as a problem solver as things come up. Stay with us. Obviously, the incumbent is Gina Raimondo. The challenger is Matt Brown, the Secretary of State. You know, listen, she's had UHIP problems and a whole bunch of other things, and I'm starting to believe after her answers yesterday that we played on the radio on WPRO to the question about whether she was going to suspend the 195 westbound project due to the incredible backup that has occurred on a daily basis this week. She kind of looked at the reporter asking the question like, I'm not the engineer. You know, ask them. She wouldn't have responded that way if she knew there was a problem. And so I'm pretty certain that she wasn't even aware, even though there's been coverage of it in the media, significant coverage, that there was a problem. What would you do in this situation if you found that a transportation project is creating a potential 18-month bottleneck, the likes of which is going to not just be an adjustment for people, but potentially hurt economics. I mean, there was a couple of people who called the radio yesterday that talked about having to take their kid out of private school because they can't get them there on time into Providence from the East Bay. And then there was this woman who's got to get her little one to Hasbro, to the Children's Hospital 3 times a week, and she can't get there. She just can't get there with the hour delay that they're suffering. What would you do in that situation?
Well,
what's your practical management skill for something like that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you've got to feel like, I mean, let me back up for a second. So I've spent my life running organizations, being the director, being the head, both in government and in nonprofit work. And you have to feel like and understand that you as the head, in this case, if I were governor, that you're responsible, ultimately, truly responsible. And you have to feel that. And you've got to kind of carry it around with you. And it has to plague you. You know, you got to go to sleep with it and you got to wake up with it. And that's the first thing. And if you are governor, if that's the job, then your responsibility is just one. It's the simplest job description in the world, which is that you have to look out for the people of the state, period. And you've got to feel that. And the second part is accountability. So if something is wrong, if something goes wrong, whether it is, you know, a mid-level staff person's fault who made a mistake, somebody who did something wrong, or honestly, even if it was something that couldn't have been foreseen or prevented, you're still responsible. You're still accountable to the people.
Well, let me ask you this: so you specifically looked in I mean, are you looking at these practical issues in this campaign? I mean, are you going to say something formally about the 195 backup? Are these tangible things that mean all the world to the taxpayers actually going to be the focus of this gubernatorial campaign, or is it just going to be theory and pot shots?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. Honestly, I feel like Governor Raimondo and I have maybe spent more time than would have liked talking about each other in this campaign, and we're in the final 2.5 weeks. And I would like to be just talking about the problems that are affecting people, which is what I've spent most of the campaign doing, but you sort of get sometimes dragged into these back and forth tit-for-tat things as you've been talking about. So I would like to do that, and I would like to be extremely pragmatic. You know, we talked when I first announced, and I had some pretty detailed plans, and we talked some more about them tonight. And I would love to, talk about how you get from here to there, how you get from where we are with this traffic to where we need to be, how we get from the healthcare system that we have to the healthcare system that we need to be. I love that stuff. That's what I've done my whole life.
If I was consulting your campaign, I'd be calling a press conference, in the middle of 195 with a solution, with some traffic consultant to say, hey, there's a better way to do this. Because that's the stuff right now, people are fed up with concepts. They want to get to work on time, and they want things to be okay in their quality of life. And everyone's missing it. Everybody's missing it.
Yes,
so,
and
FYI.
I agree with you, and we are trying to do that, and we're putting out concrete ideas. But honestly, the way this is less about talking and more about doing, and I'm eager to win this race and get in there and do these things. I mean, I am chomping at the bit to get my hands on some of these problems. I mean, I am, as I've said, I mean, I've spent my life starting and running these organizations. I'm a hands-on person. I want to get in there. I want to dig into it. I want to get great people in there, which is always the first thing. And I want to build up leaders who can help me solve these problems.
Right. Well, primary is right around the corner. Wish you the best of luck. Hope she shows up.
Thanks, Tim.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Matt Brown, running for governor, Democrat. Final word, and we come back. So Monday, Mike Stenhouse will be in here from the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. He's got this idea that he wants to talk to the union members out there and encourage them to remember that they don't have to join the union, which of course will create quite the storm in this state if that conversation catches any fire, even amidst a political campaign. So we'll see you for that on Monday. Don't forget, we're still talking to the candidates weekdays 3 to 6 on a carousel. Those who won't debate get some no-charge time on the Dan Yorke radio program. More candidates next week as well. You have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.